Hey there, my name is ARTFX, and today I'm going to show you how to make that typical Noisia Reese bass in FM8 without any post-processing. And it's going to sound like this. Let's get to it. So, here we are in Ableton Live. I've got FM8 open, and I'm gonna show you how to make that, well, typical Noisia Reese bass in FM8. I've got this MIDI clip right here, based on the key of G sharp. I've got a couple of glide notes here, so we've got some notes on a higher octave that are overlapping the other notes, and if we set up FM8 to have some glide, then it will glide between these notes, giving us that classic Reese type sound. So I want to show you today how you can make a typical Noisia Reese with just FM8, no additional post-processing. That will be a good starting point for like resampling or, you know, just making a cool bass sound with it. Obviously, if you're going to apply some post-processing, it will probably become better. But yeah, let's have a look, shall we? I'm going to switch the first oscillator to a sawtooth wave, and I'm gonna bring the output up to 100%. And let's turn on key sync so that every time a note is being triggered, it's gonna sound exactly the same. And I'm also gonna go to the master tab here, and on here I'm going to make sure that my voices is set to 1, and on the polyphony here, and also here, and I'm gonna turn on mono. And I'm also going to turn on the portamento, which is like the glide, and this will now determine the time that it takes to glide. So let's listen now to our clip. So that's what we're going to start off with. Now, if you listen to the sound, you might have said like, is that a saw wave? It sounds more like a low-pass saw wave. That is because the default saw wave in FM8 is kinda low-passed. And the way how you can turn it into like a real saw wave is by feeding the oscillator back into itself. So you do that by clicking on this box above the oscillator and then dragging up. You'll see that this happens with that little arrow pointing back into the oscillator. That means feedback. So if I play this back and then bring this up, you'll notice that it actually turns into more what a saw wave should sound like. See, eventually it turns into noise, but I feel like somewhere around here should be good. Let's just stick to 30, why not? So now I'm going to take another operator, and I'm going to create another operator that we're going to feed out to the output. And the one I'm going to use is the second formant, and I'm also going to turn on key sync on this one. So now let's send this out to the output. It gives it some more bass, gives it some more harmonics, and that is something I quite like, especially if we start, if you would start processing this with like distortion afterwards, which we will do a little bit of in this video in the effects section in FM8, but you could do like stuff with isotope trash, and especially when you're gonna do a lot of post-processing, this second oscillator will probably add a lot of harmonics to the sound, and that's what I find very interesting. Most of the time I find like just a saw wave, it's a good starting point for a Reese bass, but it has been done so often already that I feel like sometimes adding an oscillator to it can be a really good thing to make your Reese stand out and sound a little bit more original. So now we need to create the classic Reese movement, because it's still very static sound. We don't have a Reese yet. So let's turn on operator D, and let's turn key sync on that one as well. And I'm gonna set this one to the soft square. Now, what I'm gonna do is I'm going to feed this soft square into both oscillators. So what I'm first going to do is I'm going to turn off the second formant oscillator, because I want to focus on the first one first, on the saw wave. So now I'm going to take that saw wave and I'm going to feed operator D or oscillator D into F, which is a saw wave. Now listen what happens when I do that. Notice the first part, you don't really notice much of a change. It might get a little bit quieter, but after like 70%, suddenly the sound changes a lot. Now I'm gonna be somewhere around 60%, I think. Now the thing we need to set up to make this a more Reese type sound is we need to offset the pitch or the ratio of this particular oscillator, the operator D. And in FM synthesis, an operator is pretty much what an oscillator is. So if I say operator, I mean the oscillator, because that's just how they call it in an FM synth. And the same thing goes for the pitch and the ratio, because the ratio is kind of like the pitch of the oscillator. It's just that it's not set in semitones, but it's set in in a ratio compared to the main pitch of the instrument. So let's offset this pitch or this ratio with a little bit, and you'll notice immediately what happens. So I'm gonna play this. I'm gonna drag this up here. So now you can hear what starts to happen, right? Now let's play around with this amount here to see what that does to our sound. You can hear how the speed is really determined by the ratio of this oscillator. That sounds about right. So let's bring oscillator E back in, or operator E, and I'm also going to feed this one into itself. So let's bypass operator F so that we can actually only hear E now. So that's what E sounds like. Very low pass. I'm just going to feed that into itself a little bit. And now let's feed operator D into E as well. That sounds about right. And we can also play around with the ratio of this second operator called E. If I bring the ratio up to 2, it might actually change the sound quite a bit. It's not the best example right now. It sounds a little bit weird on this one, so we'll keep it at 1. Inverting the oscillator is also a good thing to try out. I think I'll keep it inverted for this one. So now we have a pretty basic Reese. This is a pretty good starting point. So now what I want to do is I'm going to feed operator F into X. Now X is the saturator, and I'm going to copy these values. So this one is at 63, and I'm going to turn these off right here. So what that does is now our operators are feeding into X, and if I then feed X to the output, we're now going to get the distorted sound. So let me set this up first, level all the way up, and let's do that. So now let's listen to this. Sounds pretty much the same as what we already had. Now let's bring up the gain here to about here, which is going to give us some more volume. And now I'm going to bring that level down, which is going to basically just cut off the peaks of the waveform, so we kind of get some distortion now. So that sounds about right. Now, I want to change the pitch bend amount. So let's go into the pitch tab right here. And the pitch bend amount is by default set to -2 or 2 semitones. That's the range of the pitch bend. I'm going to bring this down to -7 maybe. And I need to play these notes right here at the end to really hear what that does. So I like that. Let's listen to the one at the end here. Yeah, that sounds about right. So I'm also going to add a little pitch drop to the start of the sound. So what I can do that by bringing this up right here, and then maybe making this a bit shorter. So is that this one right here? Well, we can just drag this to be shorter. Okay, now we need to bring the amplitude up here. And that created a little pitch drop. So I'm going to bring this down a bit because it's quite a lot. So just creating like a little pitch drop at the start that will help to make the first initial sound of the Reese a little bit heavier and make it sound, well, as if it has a little bit of a transient, which I find is a really good thing to do. So now we have that, and it sounds pretty alright. I want to add some more bass to it though. So what we can do is we can take operator X and feed it into Z, which is the filter. And then I can feed Z back to the output. Now, if I turn off the output of operator X, then we can only hear the output of Z, which is the filter. And it now sounds like this. So you can hear how we can play around with that and create some really nice filter movement, if we want. Now, it has a lot of resonance by default, so I can bring that down. Maybe even all the way down. And we can change the mode here so that it's somewhere in between a low pass and a band pass. I find that gives a really nice sound, to be honest. Maybe a little bit more to the band pass side. But what I really want to focus on is on the lower notes. So if I play these, you can hear it has a lot of bass now. So if I bring the resonance up a bit, we can just add some bass. So now I'm gonna feed X back to the output as well, and if I play the two together, we get a bit more bass. So if I turn the filter off, we have a nice distorted sound, but it lacks a little bit of sub. And if I bring this in, we get a bit of sub, but the beauty of it is that the sub is still following the movement of the bass itself. So I could do it with a separate oscillator or a separate operator, just turn that to a sine wave at the root note value, the root note pitch, and then just route that straight to the output. That would do roughly the same thing. But the downside of that is that when I turn all of this off and we only listen to the sub bass, there is no movement in the sub. It's a very static sub bass, and that to me is not the most pleasing type sub for a Reese bass, because a Reese bass has a lot of movement. So most likely I want that movement to follow with the main bass, and if we use the filter to do it, then we actually hear that the sub bass still has some movement to it. And it's pretty much the same speed as the movement of the main Reese, which is a really good thing. So now with the two together, we might want to bring the output of the filter down a little bit so that we don't get as much bass as we get right now, because we get quite a lot of it. But that sounds about right. So now we can go into the effects tab, and here we can really start applying some effects to it and make it sound even better. So the first thing I'm going to turn on is the overdrive. It sounds a bit low pass by default, but you can fix that by bringing the tone value up. And now we can use this drive to add, well, a particular amount of distortion. So let's say I want a bit more. Now it's very subtle right now because this sound is just already very distorted, so adding even more overdrive is not really doing that much, but it does help in gluing everything together because we're processing all the different oscillators and all the different things that are laid on top of each other. We're processing it all together, and that just helps with gluing things together. So it does create a bit of extra harmonics, even though those probably were already there. It probably just strengthens them a little bit, and it flattens out the audio, which is also a good thing. So we could try add the tube amp, which is kind of a distortion as well. I find that it has a nice sound, so let's add a little bit of that, and then we are gonna add the shelving EQ. And I find with FM8 the shelving EQ is very, very powerful, and the reason for that is just listen. Because of the distortion, and especially because of that tube amp, this is without. We have some good amount of high frequencies, but as soon as I turn the tube amp on, it becomes more pleasing in the low mids, but it also lacks a bit of high end now. So what we can do is we can use this shelving EQ to bring that high end back. So how do we do that? Well, very simple. Take that take that upper point, which is the yellow one, and just raise that up. And I can do the same for the bass, just adding a little bit of that as well. And now you can hear it really starts to bring everything together. So next up, the peak EQ. The peak EQ can be helpful. Sometimes you want to cut a little bit out of the mids because all the distortion might make the mids a little bit heavy, a little bit too much maybe, and just cutting out a little bit of the mids on the peak EQ will really help to make it sound better, and it will also create some space in the sound for like other sounds in your track. So because this particular type of Reese bass is very full, it has pretty much, well, it has frequencies across the entire frequency spectrum. So if you're layering this into a track, you might get some issues mixing wise. Like some sounds might be pushed to the background because this Reese is so much up front and so full in frequencies. So cutting away some frequencies here and there and creating some space within the sound will definitely help. And I find usually it's the mid frequencies where you want to cut something away, because your snare drum is probably going to sit in the low mid frequencies, for instance. If you want to add a lead synth or a vocal or something like that, it'll probably also be somewhere in the mid frequencies for the most part. So cutting away there is definitely a good thing. Now, I think that's already the right spot. This is without. Very mid-heavy. And it just sounds better already. I can do another cut, maybe in the high frequencies somewhere. Or somewhere in the high mids. And you can hear how cutting at different places will create a different sounding Reese. If I cut somewhere in the mids here, we get a Reese with a lot of sub and a lot of high frequencies, but very little mids, which can sound very nice in a track if the track calls for that. But if I cut away somewhere here, you can hear that we have a much more bassy sounding Reese, because we're cutting away more high end. So it's just a matter of playing around, and this will definitely depend on the track that you're working on. You could even automate it, if that is possible. I don't know if that's possible. Yeah, it's possible. You could automate that. But for the sake of this video, we're not going to do any automation or any post-processing. I might actually do a follow-up video on this one where I go into detail about how to process this one and how to take it even further and use some resampling to make some new interesting bass sounds from it. If you guys want to see that. If you want, let me know in the comments below. So, without further ado, let's move on. I'm going to not use that other point, that second one. I'm just going to use the first one. So, one more thing I wanted to add here. The Reese right now is, it's pretty good, but I feel like we can add something to it, and I think a flanger would be a good thing to do. Now, a flanger will give us this kind of sound. So you can kind of hear that Reese type sound, right? So this is an effect used a lot on Reese basses, to be honest. I'm gonna turn on sync, and let's slow it down a bit. And I'm gonna turn the dry wet down a bit, and I might turn the depth and the color, well, might change that at some point, but let's listen to what this sounds right now. Now we can go back into the expert tab, and we can basically just play around with these oscillators right now with the setup that we have right here. So let me turn E off and let's see what the difference is. So that's the main oscillator, and now if I bring E back, it just sounds slightly different, but I really like the sound of it. Now let's play around with maybe the feedback here. And of course, if we go back into operator D, and if we change this right here, it will hugely affect the sound of our Reese, because, well, this will affect the speed of the Reese, because this is basically the detuning why we get this, you know, wobbly kind of movement that speeds up when we play a higher note. If we use the offset here, which is set in hertz, then it will not speed up when we go to a higher pitch. In fact, let me show you. I can do this, and now we will still get some movement, very similar. If I make it a bit more. But if we go to higher pitch, it doesn't speed up. So that's why I like to use the ratio for that. And, well, the ratio is really going to determine how fast that oscillation is going to go. It's a little too fast. Maybe a little too slow. I would probably resample this or something to make it sound even better, but it's a little bit out of place every now and then because the movement doesn't properly restart. Even though key syncing is turned on, I don't know why it happens. There's only one voice. It's set to monophonic, so it should work. Let's try without monophonic. Let's see what happens. Yeah, then it does re-trigger, but we don't want that. We want the legato notes going on. So, and as well, we could change the pitch bend time. Maybe I want it a little bit faster. So, that's it. Now, there's one thing I wanted to show. There's a couple of pitch bends in this clip. That's why that last note bends down in pitch. It It just varies subtly, but it does add something to it. And on the last one we have a bigger range. So, there you have it. That's pretty much how you would design the basic patch inside FM8 for like a good sounding Reese bass. There's obviously still more you could do to this. We haven't done any post-processing. It's just FM8. So if we go and apply additional post-processing like distortion, filtering, EQ, saturation, all those kind of things, it's definitely going to even improve the sound. But also we could change this oscillator. So let's change it to a sine and let's listen what happens. So on the sine it sounds slightly different, and if we invert this oscillator, the movement will change as well. Now we can play around with that, maybe a parabole. Sounds very similar though to the other ones. You can get really weird with this. I find this, in this particular instance, the soft square sounds really good. And we had this second operator, the second formant, and I inverted the operator, the waveform of it. Let's see what happens if we don't invert it. So that's inverted. It actually has more bass when it's not inverted, so I might actually keep it like this. But yeah. That's pretty much it. So that's it, how to make a typical Noisia Reese bass. And this is by no means the final Reese. I mean, you probably want to see more of it. And let me know in the comments if you do, because I will definitely do a follow-up video where I show you a little bit more about where to take this further. So I hope you liked this video. If you did, then please subscribe to this channel. I'm doing a live stream every Friday about music production, and I also do music production tutorials every week, well, most of the time. I haven't done a couple of ones in the last few weeks, but that was just because I was so busy with all kinds of stuff. Like I said, I do live streams every Friday at 8 PM Central European time, so if you have some time upcoming Friday, then definitely tune in for some drum and bass production. I also run a Discord community where me and a couple of hundred other music producers talk about music production, talk about plugins, talk about sample packs, and just about, you know, anything regarding music production and the whole, you know, community that sits around it. So if you want to be part of that community, you can find the invite link to the Discord server in the description below this video, and it would mean a lot if you guys would stop by and say hello. So without further ado, I hope you liked this video, I hope you learned something, and I'll be back soon. Peace!